everyone. Once again this year, it is my privilege to address you, the supporters of the dinner party, this wonderful annual tradition in the wonderful community of Halton. That is but one indicator of the vibrancy and care found in your local civil society, and in particular, a manifestation of the solidarity, passion, and hard work of the Women of Halton Action Movement, who have been standing up for the rights of women and girls beyond their borders, going on a couple of decades now. The funds raised from this event will support our work keeping education accessible to women and girls through new models that allow us to bypass the constraints that have been imposed on them, as well as to keep existing programs running despite the many changes we now face. And finally, the funds raised are allowing us to expand our programming to reach displaced Afghans as well. Besides our core mandate of realizing the right to education, we are also responding to the economic crisis now gripping many families in Afghanistan by providing emergency assistance, such as food aid, besides learning baskets, so children, youth, and their families can keep learning at home while they can't access schools. Our funds are reaching Afghanistan, and we have stayed active and operational throughout the crisis. If ever there was a time when our efforts are needed, it is now, because a crisis it is. The last few months have been a time where hope has been in short supply, and where acts of solidarity and support towards our sisters in Afghanistan are the cracks that let the light in, to paraphrase the late, great Leonard Cohen. We at Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan have heard so many stories of despair, suffering, and injustice since August, and the outpouring of compassion and solidarity we have observed from people like you has been a much needed counter that has helped everyone keep going and stay focused on being responsive to the need, to the human rights and humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding before our eyes. For me personally, I have thought of you, the community of people who care about the fate of Afghan women and girls throughout this crisis, to restore my faith that there will be a future where every woman and every girl lives in conditions where she can reach her full potential, where her rights are respected, and where doors are not shut in her face because of her gender. You know, I'm an optimist by nature, but the truth is, it is easy to become cynical in the face of what happened in Afghanistan. We have said it over and over again. The fall of Kabul, the violent seizure of power by the Taliban, and the disappearance of women's rights, indeed the disappearance of many women, literally, was not inevitable. There were opportunities to recognize what the consequences would be of legitimizing a terrorist entity whose ideology rests on their unrelenting view of women as second-class citizens. There was time to reverse course. There was a moment where it would have mattered to stand up and say, it is not okay with us to tolerate a regime that denies the humanity of women and girls. But the governments of the world chose not to do this. I'm not really sure why the shock can leave you reeling when political leaders fail morally. It has happened routinely, after all, throughout our recent history. The Islamic State's effort to obliterate the Yazidis and enslave their women and girls, and before that, Rwanda, Bosnia, the Holocaust, and countless more moral failings when the powers of the world reacted too little, too late, and with devastating human consequences that take generations to recover from, and from which the stories of injustice that do manage to get documented out of the bloody chaos stain humanity's moral record forever. Despite this track record, it is still a blunt force trauma to watch the international community, by which I mean the governments and their representative bodies, like the United Nations, sit back and let the women of Afghanistan become imprisoned in their homes, and the girls' schools sit empty, and the activists disappear, and the journalists get beat up, the civil society smothered, the working women sent home to their children they can no longer feed, to watch all of this, throw their hands in the air and say, there's nothing to be done. But there is. There is. And you have said it. And responsive you have been, just as you did in the 1990s, You've spoken out. You've put your hand up. You've asked that all-important question, but what can I do? Which is how this movement of people in Canada came into existence in the first place, and how it is sustained by people, regardless of who or where they are, asking, what can I do? And while these have been difficult days, when we've seen the worst of people, the stealing of a country by an armed group, the worst of our global leaders in preventing it, the broken promises of peace in Afghanistan, we've seen the best of you. They say it's the economy, stupid. But no, it's the people, stupid. It's the people. It's left to us, to you, to respond to this monstrous mess with a modicum of decency. You're standing up and yelling, not okay with me, and your support of this event has put your money where your mouth is. And for that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Just as it is easy to become cynical, it's easy to be overwhelmed by sorrow. I keep thinking of an Afghan woman who said she kept her eyes closed as she was driven to the airport to evacuate because she didn't want her last vision of Kabul to be how it was that day. People left behind not only the place they knew as home, but a place they had seen grow and change, and we all believed there was much more to come. A generation who had grown up free of the yoke of the Taliban had been trailblazing a new country, laying the stones of a foundation for a society that was boldly and fearlessly taking up its place in the world, with women at the center of this effort. Then the rug was pulled out from under them. But those women are still there. Please remember that. And they need us. They have not stopped speaking out, not for 1 second, no matter the danger to them. Literally, since the same month the Taliban took power, women have been protesting in the streets. They've been writing, speaking, shouting, screaming. In January, the Taliban were invited to Oslo to meet with representatives of other governments, in a move many Afghans observed with justified skepticism. A small number of Afghan women also traveled to Oslo to remind the international community of their predicament under the Taliban. One of these women was Hoda Khamouche. She said this during her speech, speaking of her counterparts back in Afghanistan. I feel their pain from thousands of miles away with my bones and hear their cries under the Taliban torture. The question is, why are the Taliban imprisoning us in Kabul and now sitting here at the negotiating table with us in Oslo? What is the international community doing in the face of all this torture and repression? Suppression and assassination take place in front of your eyes. By remaining silent or tolerating the Taliban, you are partly responsible for these crimes and repression committed against men and women of Afghanistan. There she was, face to face with the Taliban who rule the country she has to go back to. And still, she didn't mince her words. These acts of courage are the beacons of light during this darkness, and they are occurring every day. Let this courage fuel our efforts too. We don't have to worry about a knock at the door in the dead of night, like what happened to Parwana Ibrahim Khail and Tamana Pariani, two activists who are currently missing, presumed disappeared by the Taliban. We don't have to wonder how we will feed our families tomorrow. People in these situations are speaking out, so we can too. And we must. Afghan women and girls need you. They need your voices, your support, your outrage, your compassion, and your solidarity. They need you to see yourself in them. During a protest organized by Afghan diaspora this past summer, a woman held up a sign that said, "You don't need to be Afghan to stand up for Afghanistan. You just need to be human." Let's be human beings, damn it. Let's show governments the proper way to behave during a crisis that is killing human beings, which is to do something about it. We won't succeed overnight, but in the end, the women will win. The girls will be back in school. The Taliban are too late. They cannot shove women back into the dark ages. They cannot lock girls out of their schools. The girls are too fierce, the women too brave. They worked too hard to get there. They saw already the vision of where they want to be, and they will not go back.